History is usually a desperate scream for power, land, and glory. But today, we are looking at the guys who just wanted a nap. We have an emperor who cared more about his pet chicken than the fall of Rome, and a sultan who shushed a messenger during a siege because the fish were biting. These aren't just lazy kings, they are the absolute masters of doing nothing. Here are 33 rulers with zero chill. Wait, actually, they had way too much chill. 1. Emperor Honorius. While the Western Roman Empire was literally collapsing in 410 AD, Emperor Honorius was safely hiding in his palace in Ravenna, miles away from the chaos. When a breathless messenger burst into his chamber shouting, "Rome has perished," Honorius didn't weep for his people or his legacy. Instead, he went pale and screamed in horror because he thought the messenger was talking about his favorite pet chicken, which he had creatively named Roma. When the eunuch awkwardly clarified, "No, Your Majesty, the actual city of Rome has been burned by the Visigoths," the emperor let out a massive sigh of relief and replied, "Oh, thank the gods. I was so worried because I just fed the bird from my own hand." Imagine being so detached from reality that the destruction of the world's greatest city is just a minor footnote compared to the health of your poultry. 2. Diocletian. In a history book full of Roman emperors who were either assassinated, poisoned, or died in battle, Diocletian is the ultimate outlier. After 20 years of successfully cleaning up the absolute mess of the crisis of the 3rd century, he looked at the supreme power of the throne and said, "I am done." He became the first emperor to voluntarily retire, moving to a massive palace in modern-day Croatia to pursue his true passion, farming vegetables. When the empire inevitably started falling apart without him, his former colleagues begged him to return to power. Diocletian's response was legendary. He pointed to his garden and told them, "If you could show the cabbage that I planted with my own hands to your emperor, he definitely wouldn't dare suggest that I replace the peace and happiness of this place with the storms of a never-satisfied greed." He literally chose salad over ultimate power. 3. Al-Amin. This Abbasid caliph took procrastination to a level that was honestly impressive. During the brutal siege of Baghdad, his own brother's army was pounding the city walls with catapults, and the dynasty was crumbling. His generals were frantic, soldiers were dying, and the situation was critical. But where was Al-Amin? He was sitting quietly by the Tigris River with a fishing rod in his hand. When a panicked messenger rushed in to deliver urgent news about the enemy breaching the defenses, Al-Amin didn't grab his sword. Instead, he frantically shushed the guy and whispered, "Quiet, you're going to scare them, Kuda is biting." Kuda was the name of his favorite fish. This man was about to lose his head, but he was far more concerned about losing a carp. That is a level of chill that borders on insanity. 4. Calvin Coolidge. Known as Silent Cal, this US president turned doing nothing into a competitive sport. He slept about 11 hours every night and religiously took 2-hour naps in the afternoon, believing that most problems would solve themselves if you just ignored them long enough. He was famously allergic to small talk. The best story involves a high society dinner where a woman sat next to him and said, "Mr. President, I made a bet today that I could get more than 2 words out of you." Coolidge stared at her while eating his dinner and simply replied, "You lose." And he didn't say another word for the rest of the night. He presided over the economic boom of the Roaring '20s by barely lifting a finger, proving that sometimes the most effective leadership style is just staying in bed and keeping your mouth shut. 5. Emperor Zhengde. Being the Emperor of China meant living a life of strict ritual and boring bureaucracy, but Zhengde had zero interest in that. He turned the Forbidden City into his personal theme park. He found court life so dull that he ordered the construction of a fake commercial city inside the palace grounds, complete with shops and taverns. He forced his ministers and eunuchs to dress up as merchants so he could play the role of a common shopkeeper and haggle with them over prices. But it gets crazier. He created an imaginary alter ego named General Zhu Shu, and he would actually issue imperial decrees to this fake person. He was essentially LARPing as a cool soldier while sitting on the dragon throne, using the national budget to fund his elaborate games of make-believe while the government panicked. 6. Pedro II. Pedro II is likely the only monarch in history who viewed a military coup against him as a lovely surprise. He ruled Brazil for 58 years and was genuinely brilliant, but he hated the job with every fiber of his being. He preferred books to crowns and often said he would rather be a teacher. When the military finally staged a coup in 1889 to overthrow the monarchy, you would expect anger or resistance. Instead, Pedro's reaction was basically, "Finally." He reportedly said, "If it is all over, I shall go to Europe," and just started packing his bags. He didn't try to fight to keep his throne. He just treated the revolution like an early retirement package. He was so incredibly chill about losing an entire empire that the revolutionaries were actually confused by his lack of drama. 7. Frederick III. This Holy Roman Emperor earned the nickname Arch-Sleepyhead of the Holy Roman Empire, and it was well-deserved. His entire military and political strategy was aggressive passivity. When enemies invaded his lands or threatened his borders, Frederick didn't launch counterattacks or panic. He just sat there. He figured that if he waited long enough, his enemies would eventually die, run out of money, or get bored. And the most insane part is that it actually worked. He outlived almost all of his rivals, including the fierce King of Hungary who had kicked him out of Vienna. Frederick simply waited for the guy to die and then moved back in. He expanded the Habsburg domains not by shedding blood, but by having the metabolism of a sloth and the patience of a rock. 8. Sultan Ibrahim. If you think you like soft blankets, you have nothing on Sultan Ibrahim of the Ottoman Empire. This guy was known as Ibrahim the Mad, and his priorities were exclusively focused on sensory pleasure. He was obsessed with furs to a pathological degree, wishing to cover the walls and floors of his palace in sable. He even started taxing his subjects in furs just to satisfy his fetish. When he wasn't stroking walls, he was sending agents across the empire to find the heaviest woman possible because he loved generous proportions. They eventually found a woman weighing nearly 330 pounds whom he nicknamed Sugar Cube and made the governor of Damascus just for fun. While the empire needed a leader, Ibrahim was too busy turning the Topkapi Palace into a fuzzy, hedonistic playhouse. 9. Wenceslaus IV. This king of Bohemia was so notoriously lazy that he managed to get fired from being the Holy Roman Emperor. Wenceslaus didn't just sleep in, he actively ghosted the Pope. He failed to show up for his own coronation because he was too busy drinking in local pubs or hunting in the woods. He was so bad at showing up for work that the German princes eventually held a meeting to depose him for being entirely useless. And true to form, Wenceslaus didn't even bother to attend that meeting either. He preferred the company of commoners and bathgirls to dukes and bishops. At one point, his own brother had him thrown in jail just to get him to stop partying, but Wenceslaus treated it like a forced vacation. He is the patron saint of calling in sick when you just want to go to the bar. 10. Ludwig II of Bavaria. King Ludwig II, known as the Fairy Tale King, treated running a country like an annoying distraction from his main job, being a Disney princess. While Prussia was unifying Germany and rewriting the map of Europe, Ludwig was totally checking out. He hated public functions and politics so much that he completely reversed his schedule, sleeping all day and wandering his palaces at night. He spent the national budget building insane architectural wonders like Neuschwanstein Castle, just so he could live in a fantasy world. He would go on midnight sleigh rides through the snow in elaborate costumes, pretending he was a medieval knight. When ministers tried to talk to him about the budget crisis, he would just order dinner for himself and his imaginary friend, Louis XIV. He wasn't ruling, he was LARPing on a state level. 11. Antoninus Pius. In a history of Roman emperors defined by murder, madness, and conquest, Antoninus Pius stands out for being aggressively boring. He ruled for 23 years and is considered one of the 5 good emperors, mainly because he refused to do anything dramatic. He never led an army into battle. In fact, he never even left Italy once during his entire reign. He was the ultimate homebody, managing the vast empire like a small family business from his villa. While others sought glory, he sought comfort. His reign was the peak of the Pax Romana, simply because he didn't start trouble. His death was perfectly on brand. He didn't die by poison or sword. He ate too much Alpine cheese at dinner, went to sleep with a full stomach, and just peacefully never woke up. The man literally died from snacking too hard. 12. Emperor Wanli. We have all had days where we don't want to work, but Emperor Wanli of the Ming Dynasty took a sick day that lasted for 30 years. It is known by historians as the Wanli neglect. Because his officials wouldn't let him appoint the heir he wanted, Wanli decided to quiet quit on a massive scale. He refused to attend morning meetings, refused to read reports, and refused to fill empty government positions. By the end of his reign, entire ministries were empty because he just wouldn't sign the hiring paperwork. He stayed deep inside the Forbidden City, ignoring the crumbling empire outside and refusing to see anyone. Archaeologists later found that he was likely an opium addict, which explains the lethargy. But imagine ghosting your entire government for 3 decades just because you lost an argument with HR. 13. José Mujica. Fast forwarding to modern times, José Mujica of Uruguay is the definition of zero ego. While most presidents are fighting for private jets and gold-plated palaces, Pepe Mujica refused to even live in the presidential residence. He stayed on his wife's ramshackle flower farm, where the only security guard was a 3-legged dog named Manuela. He donated 90% of his salary to charity and drove a beat-up 1987 Volkswagen Beetle. He didn't care about power suits or motorcades. He just wanted to live his humble life. When asked about being called the poorest president, he said, "I'm not poor. Poor are those who need a lot to live." He ran a country while looking like a guy who just wants to sell you some organic tomatoes at a farmer's market, proving you don't need a golden throne to lead. 14. Liu Shan. Liu Shan is so famous for being useless that his infant name, Adu, is still Chinese slang for a person with no potential. During the violent Three Kingdoms period, he inherited the kingdom of Shu but clearly didn't inherit his father's spine. When the enemy army approached, he surrendered immediately to avoid the hassle of a siege. But the real chill moment came later. He was held captive in the enemy capital, and during a banquet, the victors played sad music from his homeland to see if he would get depressed. His own attendants cried, but Liu Shan laughed and said, "I'm having so much fun here. I don't miss Shu at all." Even the enemy general was shocked by how little he cared about losing his kingdom. He chose partying over patriotism every single time. 15. Ferdinand VI, King. Ferdinand VI of Spain practiced a foreign policy of aggressive neutrality. While France and Britain were tearing each other apart and begging Spain to pick a side, Ferdinand just locked the doors. He was prone to melancholy and had zero interest in war or politics. His only real policy was listening to the famous castrato singer Farinelli. Every single night for 20 years, Farinelli would sing the exact same 4 songs to the king to soothe his nerves. That is it. That was the royal routine. While Europe burned, the King of Spain was just vibing to his favorite playlist on repeat. He kept Spain out of conflicts simply because he wanted a quiet life to listen to his private concerts. It was basically music therapy on a geopolitical scale. 16. Pope Celestine V. Pietro da Morone was an 80-year-old hermit living in a cave on a mountain when he received a letter saying he had been elected pope. He was horrified. He didn't want the job, but he accepted it as Pope Celestine V out of duty. It was a disaster. He hated the Vatican bureaucracy, the politics, and the fancy robes. He actually had a wooden cell built inside the papal apartments so he could sit inside and pretend he was back in his cave. After just 5 months of misery, he issued his only important decree, a law allowing popes to quit. He immediately resigned, stripped off his papal rings, and tried to run back to his mountain. He is the patron saint of realizing you got the wrong job promotion and quitting before the probation period is even over. 17. Prince Regent. George. While Napoleon was literally rewriting the map of Europe and threatening to invade England, Prince Regent George was fighting his own personal battle, the battle against boredom. He didn't care about the war, he cared about sash windows and sauces. He spent obscene amounts of money building the Brighton Pavilion, a bizarre Indian-Chinese fantasy palace, while the country was broke. He ate so much he became a national joke, with cartoonists drawing him as a giant blob. He once held a banquet with a stream of water running down the table with live fish in it, just for the aesthetic. He was so detached from reality that later in life, he actually hallucinated that he had led a cavalry charge at the Battle of Waterloo, despite never being anywhere near the battlefield. He was living in a delusional, hedonistic bubble while the world burned. 18. Selim II. After the terrifying reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottoman Empire got Selim II, affectionately known as Selim the Drunkard. He was the first sultan who looked at the tradition of leading armies into battle and said, "Hard pass." He literally never stepped foot on a battlefield. Instead, he handed the keys to the empire to his Grand Vizier and retreated into the harem to focus on his true passion, Cyprus wine. Legend says he only invaded Cyprus because his favorite vintage came from there, and he wanted to secure the supply chain. While his navy was getting crushed at the Battle of Lepanto, Selim was likely 3 bottles deep, composing bad poetry. He eventually died, not by the sword, but by slipping on a wet marble floor in a bathhouse while chasing a concubine in a drunken stupor. 19. Feodor I. It is ironic that Ivan the Terrible, a man who murdered his own son in a rage, left the throne to Fyodor, a man who wouldn't hurt a fly. Fyodor was arguably the most harmless czar in Russian history. He had zero interest in politics, torture, or expansion. He was intellectually disabled and spent his days wandering around churches, praying, and obsessively ringing church bells. He loved the sound of bells so much he was nicknamed Fyodor the Bellringer. The court was in chaos, boyars were plotting, and foreign powers were circling, but the Tsar was just happy if he got to pull the rope in the tower. His brother-in-law ran the entire country while Fyodor lived in a blissful, holy fog. When he died, the dynasty ended because he evidently forgot to produce an heir, plunging Russia into chaos. 20. Kamehameha III. Kamehameha III was the longest-reigning monarch in Hawaiian history, and he managed to balance modernizing his nation with being an absolute party animal. He gave Hawaii its first constitution and legal system, but his heart belonged to the waves. He kept a secluded hideaway where he could escape the missionaries and advisors to drink, dance, and surf naked. He revived the traditional hula dance that missionaries tried to ban, basically telling the fun police to get lost. At one point, he got so tired of the stiff diplomatic protocols that he and his friends just took over the streets of Honolulu for days of revelry. He proved you could steer a nation through a geopolitical minefield while still being the guy everyone wanted to invite to the afterparty. He was a statesman, but he was a surfer first. 21. Claudius. Claudius is the patron saint of introverts who accidentally get promoted to management. During the chaotic assassination of Emperor Caligula, the Praetorian Guard was rampaging through the palace, killing everyone. Where was Claudius? He was found trembling behind a curtain, hoping nobody would see him. The soldiers pulled him out, and instead of killing him, they laughed and declared him emperor. Claudius was terrified. He didn't want power. He wanted to sit in his library, drink wine, and write boring history books about the Etruscan alphabet. He spent his reign surrounded by freedmen advisors because he didn't trust the Senate, and honestly, he just wanted to finish his books. He conquered Britain almost by accident, sending generals to do the work while he likely complained about the damp weather and lack of good libraries in Rome. 22. Charles II. After years of joyless Puritan dictatorship under Oliver Cromwell, who banned Christmas, theater, and fun, England desperately needed a drink. Enter Charles II, the Merry Monarch. He didn't care much for passing laws. He cared about mistresses, parties, and his dogs. He was so obsessed with his King Charles spaniels that he let them run wild during serious state council meetings. Ambassadors would be trying to discuss treaties while the king was playing fetch or letting a dog chew on the royal furniture. He famously apologized on his deathbed for taking such a long time to die, which sums up his polite, easygoing nature. He treated the monarchy like a giant restoration festival, restoring the soul of the nation by simply refusing to take anything too seriously and ensuring everyone had a good time. 23. Queen Christina. Christina was the daughter of Gustavus Adolphus, the Lion of the North, but she had zero interest in freezing in Sweden and fighting wars. She was one of the most educated women of her time and found the Swedish court incredibly boring and unrefined. In a shocking move, she abdicated the throne at age 28, stating she just couldn't handle the job anymore. She packed up the crown jewels, converted to Catholicism, and moved to Rome to hang out with the Pope and famous philosophers. She basically gave up a superpower kingdom so she could have better conversations and warmer weather. She caused scandals everywhere she went by dressing like a man and swearing like a sailor, living her best life as a wealthy, independent intellectual tourist while her cousin dealt with the mess back home. 24. Rudolf II. Rudolf II makes other eccentric rulers look normal. He moved the Holy Roman capital to Prague and turned the castle into a wizard's tower. He had zero interest in religion or politics, which was a problem since Europe was on the brink of war. Instead, he locked himself up with alchemists, astronomers, and magicians, desperately trying to find the Philosopher's Stone. He collected creepy oddities, kept a lion and a tiger that were allowed to roam the castle freely, and commissioned those weird portraits where his face is made out of vegetables. While his brother Matthias was marching an army against him to take the throne, Rudolf was probably staring at a beaker of bubbling green liquid or feeding his lion. He eventually lost the crown, but he successfully created one of the coolest cabinets of curiosities in history. 25. Romanus. Argyros. This Byzantine emperor is a masterclass in having unearned confidence. Romanus III fancied himself a great philosopher and a mighty general, but in reality he was just a rich guy who liked expensive bathhouses. When he finally decided to lead an army into Syria to prove his manliness, he treated the military campaign like a luxury glamping trip, packing enormous amounts of baggage and fancy goods. Naturally, he panicked at the first sign of trouble and fled, leaving his army behind. Back in Constantinople, he gave up on ruling entirely to focus on managing the construction of new spas. Ironically, his chill lifestyle was his undoing. He was found dying in one of his beloved baths, likely drowned or poisoned by his inner circle who were tired of his incompetence. He literally soaked himself to death. 26. Robert III. King. Robert III of Scotland didn't just have chill, he had clinical depression and zero self-esteem. After being kicked by a horse and disabled, he basically decided that ruling was too much effort. He let his ambitious brother run the kingdom while he sat in the background sighing. He was so aware of his own uselessness that he refused to be buried with the other kings. Instead, he told his wife to bury him in a literal dunghill with the epitaph, "Here lies the worst of kings and the most miserable of men." That is a level of self-deprecation that is honestly impressive. He didn't want glory, statues, or songs sung about him. He just wanted to be remembered as the guy who knew he wasn't cut out for the job. 27. Good King. Rene. Rene of Anjou had a resume that sounded impressive. King of Naples, King of Jerusalem, Duke of Lorraine, but he barely controlled any of these places. Did he launch bloody wars to reclaim his titles? Absolutely not. Rene looked at the geopolitical map, shrugged, and retired to the south of France to live the cottagecore dream. He spent his days painting, writing poetry, gardening, and organizing fancy tournaments that were more like theatrical plays than actual combat. He was known as Good King Rene, not because he was a strong ruler, but because he was just a lovely guy to be around. He essentially traded the stress of running an empire for an art degree and a nice glass of wine in Provence, which honestly sounds like a solid life choice. 28. Richard Cromwell. Imagine inheriting a military dictatorship and simply ghosting the entire country. Richard Cromwell succeeded his terrifying father, Oliver Cromwell, as the Lord Protector of England. But while his dad was a brutal warlord, Richard was a gentle country squire who preferred hawking to politics. The army tried to push him around, and after just 9 months, Richard looked at the chaos and said, "I'm out." He resigned, packed his bags, and vanished. While England restored the monarchy, Richard lived a long, quiet life in obscurity, often using a fake name to dodge debt collectors. He died at age 85, having successfully avoided being executed, imprisoned, or stressed out, proving that sometimes the best political move is to quit before you get fired. 29. Warren G. Harding. If Calvin Coolidge was sleepy, Warren G. Harding was just partying. His presidency was basically a front for a speakeasy during Prohibition. Harding openly admitted to his friends, "I am not fit for this office and should never have been here." He spent his time in the White House playing poker twice a week with his buddies, known as the Ohio Gang, while smoking cigars and drinking whiskey that was illegal for everyone else. While his friends were busy looting the government in the massive Teapot Dome scandal, Harding was mostly concerned with his golf score. He treated the Oval Office like a frat house, creating an atmosphere of corruption simply because he was too relaxed to check what his friends were actually signing in his name. 30. Sancho II. Sancho II of Portugal achieved a rare feat. He was fired by the Pope for being too lazy. He wasn't a tyrant or a killer. He was just branded Rex Inutilis, which implies useless king. He completely neglected the administration of the kingdom, allowing his favorites to do whatever they wanted while well, nobody is quite sure what he did, but it definitely wasn't working. The chaos got so bad that the Archbishop complained to the Vatican. Pope Innocent IV issued a formal decree essentially saying, "This guy's a waste of space," and ordered the Portuguese to pick a new king. Sancho didn't even fight a civil war to keep his crown. He just went into exile in Toledo and continued doing absolutely nothing until he died. 31. Edward VIII. This is the ultimate example of choosing a good time over duty. Edward VIII caused the biggest constitutional crisis in modern British history because he didn't want to follow the rules. He wanted to marry Wallis Simpson, a twice-divorced American socialite, but the government said no. Instead of compromising or finding a workaround, Edward ruled for less than a year and then abdicated. He gave up being the king-emperor of the largest empire on earth, so he could spend the rest of his life attending dinner parties in France and wearing expensive suits. He traded the crown jewels for the freedom to be a full-time celebrity and socialite. He spent decades as the Duke of Windsor, looking very stylish and very unemployed, proving that for some, love and leisure conquers all. 32. Amenhotep III. While most pharaohs wanted to be remembered as great warriors, Amenhotep III wanted to be remembered as the guy with the most gold. He ruled Egypt during its peak prosperity and maintained peace through diplomacy, which mostly involved sending gold to other kings so they would leave him alone. With no wars to fight, he dedicated his life to extreme luxury. He built the massive Colossi of Memnon and a palace complex that was basically an ancient resort, complete with a massive man-made lake for his wife to sail on. He rebranded himself as a living god while he was still alive, just for the ego boost. His reign was one long 3-decade festival of art, statues, and excess. He was the Jay-Z of ancient Egypt. Unlimited budget, zero stress. 33. Cincinnatus, Lucius Quinctius. Cincinnatus is the ultimate mic-drop figure in political history. In 458 BC, Rome was facing total destruction, and the panicked Senate rushed to finding Cincinnatus to save them. They found him plowing his small farm, covered in dirt. They handed him absolute power, naming him dictator, which gave him total control over the entire Roman state. Most men would never let that go. Cincinnatus? He organized an army, marched out, crushed the enemy, and saved Rome in just 15 days. But here's the insane part. The moment the victory was secured, he resigned. He didn't stay for the parades or the power. He handed back the fasces, walked home, and literally picked up his plow exactly where he left off. He saved civilization in 2 weeks, just so he could get back to his farm work in peace. That is the list of history's greatest quiet quitters. Now, I need pure honesty in the comments. If you were handed absolute dictatorial power tomorrow, infinite money, no laws, total control, do you actually fix the world, or do you immediately disappear to a private island with a harem and a crate of wine? Tell the truth, I'm judging you. Smash that like button if you'd take the wine, and subscribe for more history they were too bored to teach you.